Most people think a joint needs nails, screws, or a good tube of glue to hold for the long haul. But the strongest work the plain folks have ever cut uses none of the three, and the habits behind it get tighter with age, not looser. These two hands have cut more joints than I can count, and I've made every one of the mistakes I'm about to describe so you don't have to. Here are 7 of the small disciplines that separate a piece your grandkids will still be using from one that racks itself apart in 5 years. Stay with me, because the last one is the one that keeps every other habit honest and keeps your fingers where they belong. Number 1. And this is the one that will save you more grief than any tool you own, more than a new saw, more than a better square, more than anything you could order out of a catalog. The reference face. Here is the trouble it solves. A board has 2 faces and 2 edges, and no 2 of them come off the mill perfectly flat or true to one another. The moment you start measuring off one face for one cut and the other face for the next cut, nothing lines up, and you cannot, for the life of you, figure out why. The old way settles it in about 10 seconds, and it costs you nothing but a pencil mark and a minute of looking. You pick the flattest, truest face of the board, and here is how you find it. You sight down the length of it with one eye, like sighting a rifle, and any cup or bough that a quick glance would miss shows itself plain as a crooked fence post. Then you set the board on the bench and press the corners. If it rocks, it is twisted. In wind is the old word for it. And if you lay a pair of straight sticks across the 2 ends and sight over them, the twist jumps right out at you where the sticks do not line up. The face that sits truest, that is the one you pick. You mark it with a little looping pencil scrawl right there on the wood, and you run a matching tick down onto the one edge beside it that stands squarest to that face. That face and that edge are your 2 references now, and every measurement, every square line, every gauge mark on the whole build comes off those 2 and only those 2. Wood grain is like a road map that way. Read it right at the start, and it carries you all the way through the build. Fight it, ignore it, and it tears out on you when you least expect it. And when you have got several boards going together, a tabletop, a set of drawer sides, a glued up panel, you clamp them in the order you want them and draw one big triangle straight across the tops of all of them, the point aimed the same direction. Now they can never get shuffled or turned around on you. A board slides out to be worked, and that triangle tells you exactly where it goes back and which face points up. No thinking, no guessing, no standing there in the evening holding a drawer that will not close, cross with yourself, wondering where it went wrong. I will tell you how I learned this, because it cost me a whole evening I would rather have had back. I built a set of 4 drawers as a young man, measuring off whichever face happened to be up at the time. Not one of them would close square. I sat there past dark, turning them every which way, before I understood that the boards had been true all along, and I had been the crooked one. Mark your faces. Draw the triangle. You will never spend that evening. Now the second habit on this list, and it is the one that quietly ruins more beginners than any dull blade ever did, reading numbers off a tape when you should have marked it once. Every time you read a measurement off a tape and carry that number across the shop to another board, you are trusting your eyes and your memory not to slip by a 1/16 of an inch. Do that 40 times in a build, and I promise you 3 or 4 of those numbers will come out wrong, and you will not know which ones until the joint gapes. Worse than that, small errors stack. A 1/16 here, a 1/16 there, all of them leaning the same direction, and by the far end of a run of 6 drawers you are off by better than a 1/4 inch and cannot say where it crept in. A story stick cannot make that mistake. Every part comes off the same marks on the same stick, so they all agree with each other whether the stick itself happens to be a hair long or a hair short. That is the quiet genius of it. It does not care about the true number. It only cares that every piece matches every other one. So stop reading numbers you do not need to read. A story stick is nothing but a straight, thin strip of wood or plywood, cut a hair longer than your project. Instead of writing down that a shelf sits at 11 3/8, you make a knife tick or a pencil mark on the stick right where the real thing goes. Every shelf, every rail, every hinge location marked on the stick in its true place. Then you lay that stick against every piece and transfer the mark straight across with a knife. The number never enters into it, so it can never be read wrong, and every part that comes off that stick matches every other part exactly. Use one stick for the heights and another for the widths. Label the ends so you never flip it. Hang it on the wall until the job is done, and do not let it get buried under a pile of shavings. I knew a cabinet maker I will call Jonas Weaver. Over in Wayne County, he built a 6-board tool chest his grandsons still keep their tools in, and he never owned a tape worth the name. He worked the whole thing off 2-story sticks and a square. Mark it, do not measure it. Your joints will thank you, and so will your tired eyes come evening. That brings me to the third one, and it is something most folks have never even heard of, and it is the reason so much good lumber splits before it ever becomes anything: sealing the end grain. Wood does not dry evenly. The ends of a board where the grain is cut open like the end of a bundle of straws give up their moisture 10 to 12 times faster than the long faces do. That is not a guess or an old wives' tale. The Forest Products Laboratory's own research on wood drying confirms that end grain moisture movement runs at roughly that ratio compared to the face and edge surfaces. When the ends shrink fast while the middle is still wet, the wood tears itself apart from the inside, and you get those ugly checks and cracks running in from the ends that no amount of filling ever truly hides. The fix is the cheapest thing in this whole video. The day you bring green or freshly cut boards into the shop, you paint the end grain. Any old latex paint, a smear of yellow wood glue thinned slightly with water, a rub of paste wax, or a can of proper end grain sealer if you buy rough lumber by the stack and you lay it on thick, thicker than you think you need. 2 good coats reaching an inch or 2 up from each end, because a thin coat just soaks in and quits working before it can do any good. Here is the part folks miss even when they know the trick. Every time you cross-cut a long board down to length, you have opened up fresh end grain all over again, and that new end will check just the same if the wood still has any drying left to do. So a freshly sawn end on green or half-dry stock gets sealed too right after the saw on the day, not the week after, because by the week after the checks have already started, and a check does not close back up. Once it splits, that wood is split for good. $1 of latex paint on the ends saves you the foot or two you would otherwise have to cut off and throw away. On a wide plank of walnut or cherry, that is real money, gone to something you could have stopped in a minute. The fourth habit is patience, and I know that is not what a man wants to hear when the wood is finally in the shop and the plans are drawn out on the bench. But hear me out, because this is the difference between a tabletop that stays flat and one that cups like a bowl a month after you finish it. Wood is a living thing, even after it is cut. It breathes. It takes on moisture when the air is damp and gives it up when the air is dry, and as it does, it swells and shrinks across its width, not along its length, but across the grain, season to season, for as long as it exists. So when you carry boards home from the lumberyard or the sawmill, you do not build with them that same afternoon. You sticker them. Stickering means you stack the boards with thin, even strips of scrap the stickers laid between each layer so the air can get to every face. And here is the piece that matters most. Those sticker strips have to line up one right above the other, plumb up through the whole stack, every layer directly over the one below. Stagger them careless and the boards sag in the gaps and dry themselves into a bow, and now you have made the problem instead of prevented it. Space them every 16 inches or so along the board's length, keep them plumb up the pile, and lay a little weight across the top so the uppermost boards do not curl while they settle. Then you let the stack sit in your shop in the same air your finished piece is going to live in a week or two at the very least, and a month is better on thick stock. If you have a moisture meter, and they are not expensive anymore, you want to watch the reading come down to somewhere around 6 to 8% for indoor furniture and hold there a few days before you build. The boards will move while they sit, and that is the whole point. You want them doing their moving before they are a joint, not after. I have watched a beautiful cherry tabletop pull its own breadboard, ends clean apart because the man built it in the damp of spring, and the first hard furnace heat of the following winter shrank that top, the better part of a quarter-inch across its width, while the breadboard ends stayed put. Nothing wrong with his joinery at all. He simply built with wood that had not finished moving. The wood was still alive, and it did its settling after it was a table instead of before. Build with wood that has come to rest in your shop, and it stays where you put it. Now let me stop here for a second, because the next one is the cheapest upgrade you will ever make to a shop, and hardly anyone does it. And if you are finding this useful so far, do me a small favor and give it a like. That is how it finds the next fellow sitting at his bench wondering why his plane is dragging. Number 5. Paste wax. A little can of plain paste wax, $10 or $12, and that one can will last you years of regular use if you do not lose it under the shavings. Here is everything it does. You rub a thin coat on the sole of your hand plane, let it haze over for a minute, and buff it off with a rag, and the plane quits dragging and starts to glide. A long, clean shaving lifts off smooth instead of chattering and sticking every other stroke. But there is one warning, and it is an important one. Buy a paste wax with no silicone in it. The silicone kind creeps onto your wood without you ever knowing, and it will ruin a finish, later leave you little fisheye craters that no stain or oil will take evenly. Read the can carefully, and if it says silicone anywhere on it, leave it on the shelf and find another brand. The plane is only the start. You wax the plate of your handsaw the same way, and it slides through a cut with half the effort, no more binding halfway down a long rip. You run a candle stub or a swipe of wax over the threads of a wood screw before you drive it into hard oak or maple, and it turns in easy, instead of snapping its head off and leaving you to drill it out. And every steel tool you wax gets a thin shield against rust, which in a damp shop through a humid summer is worth the price of the can all by itself. It wants doing again every week or two on the tools you work hardest, and the job takes all of 10 seconds. I have not found another thing you can buy for $10 that makes this many tools work this much better. Wax is the quiet heart of a shop that runs smooth, and it sits in your apron pocket all day like an old friend that never lets you down. The 6th habit is about glue-ups, because a glue-up is where a good project most often goes sideways, and it goes sideways silently. You clamp up a panel or a tabletop, crank those clamps down as hard as you can, because hard must mean strong, and you walk away feeling good about it. You come back to find a ridge running along one joint, or a bow across the width, or worse, a joint that opens up a year later when the seasons turn. 2 mistakes hiding in that clamp job, and here is how you fix both of them. First, use cauls. A caul is nothing more than a stout, straight stick of hardwood sometimes, with a very slight crown planed into the middle of it that you clamp across the panel above and below, running at right angles to your glue joints. Before you do, wax the face of that caul, or lay a strip of packing tape down its length, so the squeeze-out does not bond the caul right onto your panel. That is a sorry thing to find the next morning. The caul spreads the clamping pressure flat across the whole width so the boards cannot bow up or sink down in the gaps between your pipe clamps. Second, and this surprises people who have been clamping hard their whole lives, you do not crank the clamps down with everything you have got. Snug and even is what you want. You work from the center of the panel outward, middle clamp first, then the ones to either side, so any tiny bit of misalignment walks out the ends instead of trapping a bow in the middle. You bring it up until a thin, steady ribbon of glue squeezes out along the whole length of the joint. That ribbon is your signal. It means the joint is full. Crank past that point and you actually starve the joint. You press so much glue out that there is not enough left in the wood fibers to make a sound bond. Firm, even, a ribbon of squeeze out, and stop there. Then leave it alone. Most yellow wood glue wants a solid hour in the clamps before you pull them off without risk of the joint creeping, and it wants to cure longer still before you plane or scrape the surface, so do not rush it off the bench the minute the hour is up. And before the glue sets hard, lay a straight edge across the panel or sight over a pair of winding sticks, the same trick from habit number 1, and make sure it came up flat while you still have a minute to nudge a clamp and correct it. A flat panel with a sound joint beats a white-knuckled clamp job every single time, and it takes no more glue, no more time, and no more money. Just a little more attention at the right moment. And the last one, number 7, is the habit that keeps every other tool honest and keeps your fingers where they belong. A strop on the bench used little and often all through the day. My grandfather kept a strip of old leather nailed to the end of his bench, right where his hand fell naturally. For years when I was young, I watched him touch a chisel to it every few minutes, almost without looking down, the way a man adjusts his hat brim, without thinking about it. I did not understand why until I had enough years behind me. Now I do, and I have got a strop nailed to my bench in the very same spot his was. I am not talking about a full sharpening session with water stones and a half hour of your evening. That is its own lesson and a good one, but it is for another day. What I am talking about is a strop, a simple strip of leather glued to a flat block of wood, loaded with a little green chromium oxide polishing compound worked in until the leather goes dark and waxy. You can buy the compound for a few dollars at any woodworking supplier, and a stick of it lasts years. When your chisel or your plane iron or your carving knife starts to feel like it is working a touch harder than it did an hour ago, not dull yet, just the first whisper of it, you do not stop and set up the stones. You lay the bevel of the edge flat on the leather and you drag it backward, always backward, away from the cutting edge, trailing the edge through the compound. Push it forward into the leather and you will slice the strop in two and roll the edge over in the same motion, so backward every single stroke, no exceptions, and light pressure is all it needs. 10 or 12 passes on the bevel side, then 2 or 3 passes on the flat back to knock off any burr, and the edge comes back keen and polished in under a minute. You will know it took when the edge grabs your thumbnail without sliding off it, or when it shaves a clean corner off a sheet of paper instead of tearing it. That is the test, and it takes 2 seconds to run. Do that little and often every hour or so, or whenever the edge tells you, and you will go weeks between real sharpenings with the stones. The strop maintains what the stones establish, and the two together are all you need. Here is the part I want you to hold on to, because it matters more than anything else I have said today. A dull tool is the dangerous one, not the sharp one. A dull chisel does not bite the wood cleanly, so you lean into it, you push harder than you should, and the day it finally gives way, it goes straight for the hand that is holding the work. A keen edge cuts where you aim it with almost no pressure at all, and because you are not forcing it, it does not slip. Keeping your tools sharp is not fussiness, and it is not the habit of a perfectionist. It is the surest safety practice in the whole shop, and a strop on the bench is how you keep them there without it ever becoming a chore. Keep your fingers behind the blade, clamp your work rather than holding it in your free hand, and let a sharp tool do the work. A dull one cannot. So let me bring it all around, because you have stayed with me to the end, and that is worth a moment. These are the 7 habits, said Plain. First, a reference face and a penciled triangle, so no board gets shuffled or turned around on you. Second, a story stick, so you mark your measurements once instead of reading numbers off a tape 40 times and trusting your memory not to slip. Third, sealed end grain the day the board comes in, and every time you cross-cut it fresh, so it does not check and split while it dries. Fourth, stickered lumber, resting in your own shop until it has settled into the air it will live in, so the wood does its moving before it is a joint and not after. Fifth, a can of silicone-free paste wax that makes every plane and saw and screw work easier and keeps the rust from creeping onto your steel through a damp summer. Sixth, calls across your glue-ups and an honest, even clamp pressure firm enough for a ribbon of squeeze-out, no more so your panels come up flat and your joints hold a lifetime. And seventh, a leather strop nailed right to the end of your bench, used a few strokes at a time all through the day, so your edge tools stay keen and your work stays safe. Not one of those 7 cost you more than a few dollars. Not one of them requires a machine, a big shop, or a course you have to pay for. They are small disciplines, and I know they do not feel like much the first time you do them. Drawing a triangle across a set of boards, waxing a plain sole, painting the ends of a plank, it all feels too small to matter while you are doing it. That is exactly why hardly anyone does it. But these are the habits that separate the piece your family will still be using 100 years from now from the piece that goes to the curb in 5. Long enough at the bench to know what lasts and what doesn't, I can tell you plain. The little disciplines are the whole game. The bench does not care how much your saw cost. It cares whether you built the habit. Now I will be honest with you the way a neighbor ought to be, because that is what I promised at the start. None of these 7 are secrets the modern woodworking world is hiding from you. They are not exotic or complicated. They are old, they are simple, and they have been sitting in plain sight in every good shop for as long as men have been cutting wood by hand. The reason they get lost is that nobody makes $1 selling you a habit. You cannot buy a reference face off a shelf. You cannot order a story stick from a catalog. The paste wax and the end grain sealer cost almost nothing, so nobody bothers to advertise them. Simple and cheap do not photograph well, and they do not fill a sponsored video. But they fill a shop with work that holds together, and that is the only advertisement they need. Well, if this is the kind of plain talk you came for, no hype, no expensive jigs, just what actually works at the bench, subscribe, and you will not have to go hunting for honest woodworking again. I put this out every week, and I mean to keep it just this useful. Now here is my question for you, and I would truly like to hear the answer. Which of these 7 are you already doing without thinking? And which one are you going to try at your bench this week? Tell me below. I read every one that comes in, and more often than not, I learned something from what you are working on. Comment with the one that surprised you most, or tell me the project you are building right now and what wood you are working with. I keep that in mind when I am thinking about what to cover next. Start with one habit, build it until it is second nature, and let it teach you the next. That is the plain way of it, and it has never let me down. Build it once. Build it to last 100 years. I will see you back at the bench.